This is my Precalculus course. Today we're going to learn how to divide polynomials by binomials, trinomials, and other expressions. If you haven't done the homework completely and correctly from the last class, do that homework before watching this video. As I mentioned in the previous class, we're going to use long division with polynomials. So let's get started here. The process is pretty much the same as with arithmetic division, where you're not using letters. Again, we learned this in my arithmetic course. The first thing we're going to do is take the divisor and rewrite it over here. And then we're going to write that L shape, and we're going to take the dividend and put it inside here, just like we do with basic long division. And I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, I don't want to write all this stuff. It's tedious to have to rewrite. But unfortunately, there's no way around that, so just get used to it. Write all this stuff down neatly. And we need to go back and check that we wrote everything correctly, because you don't want to go through this whole problem and then find out that you rewrote the divisor or the dividend incorrectly. Okay, so now we're ready to start the process of long division. So to start off, we're going to ask, what do you multiply the first term in the divisor by to get this first term in the dividend? So x squared times what is equal to 2x to the fifth power? X squared times what is equal to 2x to the fifth power? So do you have any ideas? If you said 2x to the third power, you're correct. 2x to the third power. All right. Again, if you multiply x squared and 2x to the third power, you get 2x to the fifth power, which is this blue term. That's what we want. That's step number one. Now, step number two is to multiply that term you just wrote up there by the divisor. Now, notice that there's three terms in the divisor, so you're going to have to use the distributive property. So we're going to multiply 2x cubed times x squared, and we get 2x to the fifth power, obviously. These should be the same. If they're not the same, then we did something wrong. Then we're going to multiply 2x cubed times 2x, and we get 4x to the fourth power. Then we're going to multiply 2x cubed times negative 3, and we get negative 6x cubed. That is step number two. So the third step is we're going to subtract. So we're going to draw a horizontal line all the way out to the end here. And when we subtract, usually we write a subtraction symbol here, signifying that the operation is subtraction. But we're not going to do that when we're dividing polynomials, because this subtraction symbol can be interpreted as a negative sign on the first term there, so that's a potential for confusion. So we can just remember that we're subtracting. So we're going to subtract these. These are like terms, but notice that those are the same terms, so we'll just get 0. We have x to the fourth terms, so we can subtract those. Negative 3x to the fourth minus 4x to the fourth is negative 7x to the fourth. Now here is where the problem occurs. If you're going to have trouble with this, it's going to be right here. This is where students typically make mistakes. This is going to be a double negative when we subtract. We're subtracting negative 6x cubed. So we have negative 19x cubed minus negative 6x cubed. That's a double negative. So what that means is those two inner negative symbols, they become one positive symbol. And so we get negative 13x cubed. If you're going to make a mistake, it's probably going to be there. And notice that there are no terms here. So we're just going to pretend that those are 0. They are 0, and we're going to subtract from 33. So 33x squared minus nothing is 33x squared. And 17x minus nothing is 17x, and so on and so forth. Now, notice this 0 over here. That's kind of distracting, and we don't really need it, so we can just get rid of that. Now, remember, long division is cycles, and each cycle has 3 steps. So we're now done with the first cycle. The first step was to figure out what number goes there. The second step was to multiply the divisor and that number. And the third step was to subtract down here. It's the same 3 steps every single time. So let's keep going here. We finished with cycle 1. Now on to cycle 2. We're going to ask again, what do you multiply the first term in the divisor by to get to the first term in this remainder down here? So x squared times what is equal to negative 7x to the 4th. Again, x squared times what is equal to negative 7x to the 4th. And if you said negative 7x squared, you're right. Negative 7x squared. If we multiply these yellow ones, we get negative 7x to the 4th, and that's what we want. We want that blue term there. So that's step number 1 of cycle 2. Now on to step 2. Step 2 is we're going to multiply that number and the divisor. Negative 7x squared times x squared is, of course, we know, negative 7x to the 4th. We designed it that way. Those should be the same. If they're not the same, we did something wrong. Negative 7x squared times 2x is negative 14x cubed. And negative 7x squared times negative 3 is positive 21x squared. Whoops, meant that to be green. You don't have to use different colors here, by the way. Okay, so then we're going to move on to step number 3. Again, this was step number 2, multiplying. Figure out what this number is going to be is step number 1. Multiply that number by the divisor, that's step number 2. And now we're going to subtract in step number 3. So remember, draw your line all the way out to the end. And if we subtract these, we get 0. Negative 13x cubed minus negative 14x cubed is going to be positive x cubed. Don't be confused by that. Be careful. That's a double negative. And 33x squared minus 21x squared is 12x squared. And 17x minus nothing is 17x. And negative 30 minus nothing is negative 30. So that was step number 3 of cycle number 2. And again, this 0 over here, we don't really need that. You don't really have to write that. That's kind of distracting, so we're going to get rid of that. Now we're going to move on to cycle number 3. This was step 3 of cycle 2. Now we're on to cycle 3. What do we multiply the first term in the divisor by to get this blue term down here? So, in other words, again, x squared times what is equal to x cubed? Well, that's pretty easy. Obviously, it's just going to be x. You'll get the hang of this as you go along. So we're going to add the x up here. That's the first step of cycle number 3. Now, the second step is to multiply that term by the divisor. Again, it's the same thing over and over and over again, the same 3 steps. This may look complicated, but it's really not. You're just doing the same 3 steps over and over again. So x times x squared is x cubed, and it should be x cubed because that's what we want. We want these to be the same. And x times 2x is 2x squared. And x times negative 3 is negative 3x. So that was step number 2. Step number 2 is always multiplying. Step number 1 is where you figure out what this number is going to be. And step number 3 is when you subtract. So we're going to draw a horizontal line all the way to the end of the numbers. And we're going to subtract these. We get 0, but we don't have to write the 0. Subtract these, we get 10x squared. Subtract these, and be careful, that's a double negative. So 17x plus 3x is 20x. Again, you might say, well, wait a second, we're not adding 3, we're subtracting 3. Well, actually, you're subtracting negative 3. So that becomes 17x plus 3x. Be very, very careful. And negative 30 minus nothing is negative 30. So that is step number 3 of the third cycle. So we just finished the third cycle. Now at this point, you're probably thinking to yourself, I don't like this stuff. I don't want to do this. I don't want to write all this stuff. This is too much work. It's intimidating, so on and so forth. But very important to understand, this is not difficult. This is just the same 3 steps over and over again. And when it comes to you having to write this, don't complain about it. Just do it. Yes, in algebra you have to do a lot of writing like this stuff, and it's really intimidating, but just get it done. I don't care if you're 50 years old learning this stuff, or if you're 5 years old learning this stuff. Just get it done. Okay, so now we're going on to cycle number 4. Maybe we can go to, what color should we use? Purple. Again, step number 1, same thing. X squared, this first term in the divisor, x squared times what is equal to 10x squared. So again, just to be absolutely clear what we're doing here, we're asking, if we use this purple pen over here, x squared times what is equal to 10x squared. And that's pretty easy, as you can see. It's just going to be 10. So we put our 10 up there. That was step number 1. We put our 10 up here. Step number 2, we're going to multiply 10 by the divisor. So 10 times x squared is obviously 10x squared. And 10 times 2x is 20x. And 10 times negative 3 is negative 30. That was step number 2. Now we're going to do step number 3, draw this horizontal and subtract. As you can imagine, these cancel out. So we get 0 there, but we don't have to write the 0. Over here, 20x minus 20x, we get 0. And over here, negative 30 minus negative 30, again, that's a double negative, so it's negative 30 plus 30, and we get 0. But you don't have to write 3 zeros like this. You can just write 1 0 at the far right. So notice that our remainder down here in yellow was 0. So that means that there is no remainder. There's nothing more to divide. So that means that we're done. If your remainder down here is 0, you're done. Now, in the first 6 problems that we're going to do, the remainder is going to be 0. But that's not always going to be the case. We're going to have some problems where the remainder is not 0. When the degree of the remainder is less than the degree of the divisor, then that means you can stop dividing. But we're going to talk about that more later on. You may think, well, wait a second, where's our answer? We divided this dividend by the divisor here, but where's the answer? Well, the answer is this green expression up here. Whatever you put up here, that is the answer. So now we're going to write the final answer down at the bottom so we can clearly see what our answer was. So 2x cubed minus 7x squared plus x plus 10. Rectangle that, and we're done. So again, this seems very, very long. It seems very, very tedious. It'll probably be a little intimidating. But once you start to figure out how this works, you're going to realize this is really not that difficult at all. It just looks difficult. Now, you don't have to use different colors. The only purpose of that is to show you the different cycles. So in this problem, we had 4 cycles: a red cycle, a green cycle, orange cycle, and a purple cycle. So 4 cycles total. But you don't have to use the different colors. So let's try another problem. We'll try a couple more before you try one on your own. First, we write the divisor. And you want to write your divisor pretty far to the left, because we may need a lot of room with these long division problems. And then we're going to write the dividend. And please go back and make sure that we wrote everything correctly, because you don't want to do all that work and find out that you didn't write the original problem right. So we're ready to go. First step, what do you multiply the first term in the divisor by to get 3x to the 4th? So just to be very clear, x times what is equal to 3x to the 4th. If you said 3x to the 3rd power, you're right. 3x to the 3rd power. That's step number 1. Step number 2, we multiply that number we just wrote, that term, by the divisor. So 3x cubed times x is 3x to the 4th power. It should be 3x to the 4th power, because we want these to be the same. And 3x cubed times negative 4 is negative 12x cubed. So that was step number 2 of cycle number 1. And step number 3 is to subtract. So we draw a horizontal all the way out to the end. Subtract these, we get 0. Subtract these, we get negative 14x cubed. Then 77x squared minus nothing is 77x squared. And negative 94x minus nothing is negative 94x, and so on and so forth. So that was cycle number 1. Again, 3 steps. Figure out what this number is going to be, step number 1. And then step number 2 is multiply these. And then step number 3 is subtract. So now we're on to cycle number 2. We start the whole thing over again. X times what is equal to negative 14x cubed? And the answer is negative 14x squared. That's step number 1 of cycle 2. Step number 2, we're going to multiply that term we just wrote by the divisor. Negative 14x squared times x is negative 14x cubed. And negative 14x squared times negative 4 is positive 56x squared. That was step number 2 of cycle 2. Now we're going to subtract, draw that horizontal all the way to the end there. Subtract these, we get 0. Subtract these, we get 21. x squared. And negative 94x minus nothing is negative 94x, and 40 minus nothing is 40. So that was cycle number 2. The green was cycle number 2, the red was cycle number 1. But we need to keep going. We need to keep going until the degree of the remainder is less than the degree of the divisor. The degree of this yellow expression up there is 1, because the highest or the greatest exponent is 1. There's no exponent on the x, but it's considered to be 1. The exponent down here, the highest exponent is 2. So we got to keep going until the degree here is less than the degree here. So starting with cycle 3, x times what number is equal to 21x squared? And the answer is 21x. That's step number 1 of cycle 3. Step number 2, we're going to multiply the divisor with that number we just wrote. 21x times x is 21x squared. That's what we should have. And 21x times negative 4 is negative 84x. That was step number 2. And step number 3 is always to subtract. So we subtract these, we get 0. We subtract these, we get negative 10x. And 40 minus nothing is just 40. So that was cycle number 3. Now we'll move on to cycle number 4. Because now the degree here is the same. The degree in the divisor is 1, and the degree down here is 1. They're the same degree. We need to keep going until the degree at the bottom is less than the degree in the divisor. So x times what is equal to negative 10x? X times what is equal to negative 10x? And the answer is negative 10. That was step 1 of cycle 4. Step 2 is to multiply that number by the divisor. Negative 10 times x is negative 10x. And that's what we should get. We want the same number as we have here. And negative 10 times negative 4 is positive 40. And as you can see, again, we don't have a remainder. Step number 3 of cycle 4 is to subtract, so we'll draw that horizontal, and we get 0 because those are all the same numbers. So in this problem, we did not have a remainder. Again, we're starting with problems where we don't have a remainder. Now, where is the answer? That's the most important part, obviously, is the answer. Where's our answer? Well, it's up here in yellow. So now we're going to rewrite that over here at the bottom left. 3x cubed minus 14x squared plus 21x minus 10. That's our final answer. So we're going to do one more of these before you try one on your own. Again, we need to first write the divisor at the very far left and make sure your divisor is far enough to the left so that we have enough room. And then we write this little L-shaped turned over, and we write the dividend inside. And we need to check to make sure that we wrote all those terms correctly. And we're going to start cycle 1. Step 1, what number do you multiply the first term of the divisor by to get 4x to the 5th, the first term in the dividend? And the answer is x squared. So that's step number 1 of cycle 1. In step number 2, is to multiply that term we just wrote by the entire divisor. So multiply x squared and 4x cubed, then we get 4x to the fifth, and we should get 4x to the fifth because we want these numbers to be the same. That's the whole point. And then we multiply x squared times 5x squared, again using the distribution property, and we get 5x to the fourth. So that was step number 2, to multiply this term in the divisor. So now we're going to subtract. That's step number 3. Draw this horizontal all the way out. We subtract these, we get 0, of course. We subtract these, we get 4x to the fourth. And if you subtract negative 3x cubed, or something from negative 3x cubed, it's 0. Obviously, we're just going to get the same number. So now we're done with cycle number 1. Now on to cycle number 2. 4x cubed times what is equal to 4x to the fourth? And if you said x, you're right. Step number 2, multiply that term we just wrote by the divisor. X times 4x cubed is 4x to the fourth power. And x times 5x squared is 5x cubed. That was step number 2. Now step number 3, subtract. So draw a horizontal all the way out to the right. And subtract these, we get 0. Subtract these, we get negative 8x cubed. Again, if you're going to have problems, it's going to be the subtraction that's going to be the issue. Make sure you subtract properly. And negative 10x squared minus nothing is negative 10x squared. So at this point, we're close to being done, but not quite, because our degree here, which is 3, because the highest exponent is 3, is the same as the degree in the divisor. So that means we need to go one more step probably. So we're going to go on to cycle number 3. The first term in the divisor times what is equal to the first term in the remainder? What do you think that would be? If you said negative 2, you're correct. So that was step number 1. Now step number 2, multiply that number we just wrote by the divisor. Negative 2 times 4x to the third is negative 8x cubed. And negative 2 times 5x squared is negative 10x squared. That was step number 2 of the third cycle. Now step number 3 is to subtract, so we draw that horizontal. And notice that those numbers are the same, so we're just going to get 0. So in this problem we had 4 cycles. In this problem we had 4 cycles. But in this problem we only had 3 cycles. Sometimes you'll only have 1 cycle or 2 cycles, and theoretically you could have a billion cycles. But of course we're not going to do any more than 4 cycles, maybe 5 at the most. But I'm not going to give you a lot of problems like that because that would be pretty tedious. So now down here we're going to write the final answer, which is of course this yellow expression here, x squared plus x minus 2. Again, all the problems that we're going to be doing now have a remainder of 0. We'll get into problems that don't have a remainder of 0 later on in the class. And we don't really have any more numbers here, so we can't keep going. Our remainder is 0. Our degree here is smaller than the degree up here, because if you have a 0 term, the degree is just assumed to be 0. Remember, any constant number, whether it's 5 or pi or whatever, is assumed to have a degree of 0. 0 could also be written next to. So let's go on to problem number 4. I want you to attempt problem number 4 on your own, and you can get a screenshot of all these problems if you'd like to help you. Again, you don't need colors. The colors are just to help you see the different cycles. So go ahead and try number 4. And when you come back, we'll do it together. Okay, we're back. So first we need to write the divisor at the far left. And then the dividend. Let's double check to make sure we have all those terms right. And step number 1 of cycle 1 is to figure out what number you multiply 5x squared by to get 5x to the 4th. And if you said x squared, you're correct. Step 2, multiply x squared times the entire dividend. X squared times 5x squared is 5x to the 4th. And x squared times negative 7x is negative 7x cubed. And x squared times negative 6 is negative 6x squared. Step 3 is to subtract. Make sure you draw your horizontal all the way out. And we're going to get negative 25x cubed and 5x squared, 72x, 36. Again, if you have problems, it's going to be the subtraction here. Be very, very careful. This is going to be a double negative. You're taking negative 32 and subtracting negative 7. So that's the same thing as adding 7 to negative 32. And here you have a double negative also. We're taking negative x squared and subtracting negative 6x squared. So that's negative x squared plus 6x squared. Okay, so that was step 3 of cycle 1. Now we're moving on to cycle 2. Step number 1, 5x squared times what is equal to negative 25x cubed? And if you said negative 5x, you're right. Step number 2, multiply this term by the divisor, negative 5x times 5x squared is negative 25x cubed. Negative 5x times negative 7x is positive 35x squared. And negative 5x times negative 6 is positive 30x. That was step number 2. Now step number 3 is to subtract. These should be 0, of course. 5x squared minus 35x squared is negative 30x squared. 72x minus 30x is 42x. And 36 minus nothing is 36. So we still have degree 2, and up here in the divisor we have degree 2, so we're going to have to do one more cycle. So let's start again. Step number 1, 5x squared times what is equal to negative 30x squared? And if you said negative 6, you're correct. Step number 2, multiply negative 6 times the divisor. Negative 6 times 5x squared is negative 30x squared. And negative 6 times negative 7x is 42x. And negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36. That was step number 2. Now, step number 3, we're going to subtract. And as you can see, the remainder is just going to be 0. So on that problem, we had 3 cycles. So let's write the final answer. It is going to be this expression up here. X squared minus 5x minus 6. So if you got that answer, very, very good. If you didn't get that answer, that's okay. You may have just made a small mistake somewhere. That's okay, just go back and fix that. Okay, so go ahead and try number 5, and when you come back, we'll do it together. Again, we're going to write the divisor first, and then the dividend. And let's double check that we wrote everything correctly. We don't want to make a mistake because we wrote something down incorrectly. So everything looks right. Now let's do our first cycle. So 2x times what is equal to 2x to the 5th power? And the answer is x to the 4th power. That's step 1. Step 2, multiply, and we get 2x to the 5th power plus 3x to the 4th power. That was step 2. Now step 3, we're going to subtract. Subtract these, you get 0, as we should. Subtract these, we get 6x to the 4th. And subtract nothing from all this stuff, and we just get those same numbers. So that was cycle number 1. Now we start cycle number 2. We ask 2x, the first term in the divisor, times what number up here is equal to the first term in the remainder. So again, 2x times what number up here would be equal to the first term in the remainder. And the answer is 3x cubed. That was step number 1. Step number 2, we see that why that works. We multiply. 3x cubed times 2x is 6x to the 4th power. And these numbers should be the same, so we know we did it correctly. And 3x cubed times 3 is 9x cubed. So that was step 2. Now we do step 3, which is subtract. Subtract these, they go to 0. 5 minus 9 is negative 4. And there's nothing really to subtract from these terms. We're just subtracting 0 from these terms, I guess you could say. And now we move on to step number, or cycle number 3. We ask what the first term in the divisor times what is equal to the first term in the remainder. So 2x times what is equal to negative 4x cubed, and the answer is negative 2x squared. Why is that? Well, we're going to find out why that is in the next step. Step number 2, we multiply that number by the divisor, and we get negative 4x cubed, and that's where we came up with that number because these need to cancel out. Negative 2x squared times 3 is negative 6x squared. So we multiply this term by the whole divisor using the distributive property. And now we're going to subtract. These just go to 0. Be careful, we have a double negative here. Negative 30 minus negative 6 is negative 30 plus 6, which is negative 24. And then negative 52x minus nothing is negative 52x, and negative 24 minus nothing is negative 24. So that was the end of cycle number 3. Now we're on to cycle 4. Again, we go back to the same thing. The first term in our divisor times what is equal to the first term in the remainder, and the answer is negative 12x. Why is that? Because when you multiply negative 12x times 2x, you get negative 24x squared, which is the exact same number that you see here, so that when we subtract, those are going to cancel out. But we have to multiply negative 12x times the entire divisor using the distribution property. So we have to multiply negative 12x times 3 also. Negative 36x is what we get. That was step 2. Now we move on to step 3. We subtract. Be careful, again, we have a double negative here. That's going to be negative 16x, and negative 24 minus nothing is negative 24. So now we're done with cycle number 4, and so we're on to cycle number 5. So again, same process. The first term in the divisor times what is equal to the first term in the remainder. And the answer is negative 8, because negative 8 times 2x is negative 16x. That's the same number we got down here. And negative 8 times 3 is negative 24. And now we subtract, and notice when we subtract we get 0 plus 0, which is just 0, so we can just write 0 at the far right. That's the tradition. And notice that we don't have any more numbers up here to subtract from, and we're done. So the final answer is this yellow expression up here. So we have x to the 4th plus 3x cubed minus 2x squared minus 12x minus 8. And rectangle that. And there you go. So if you got that answer, excellent. Very good. Go ahead and try number 6. I'm going to leave these problems in the window, and when you come back, we'll do it together. Okay, we're back. So as usual, write your divisor at the far left. Make sure you have enough room. And write your dividend inside this little half box shape. And let's go double check everything that we wrote to make sure that we copied everything properly. You don't want to waste your time doing a lot of work and then find out you didn't write the problem down correctly. So now we're going to ask, if you multiply the first term in the divisor by some number, what would that number be to get x to the 4th? So x times what is equal to x to the 4th? And the answer is x cubed. That's step number 1. Step number 2, multiply the divisor by that number using the distribution property. So we get x to the 4th, which is what we should get, and negative 3x cubed. Step 3 is to subtract. And if we do that, we get 8x cubed, and we just bring down these terms because we're just subtracting 0 from those terms, which means they don't really change. Negative 5x squared minus 0 is negative 5x squared. Negative 45x minus 0 is negative 45x, so on and so forth. So that's cycle number 1. Now we move on to cycle number 2. We do the same thing. We ask if x times what is equal to 8x cubed. X times 8x squared. And now we're going to, step 2, we're going to multiply these two, the divisor in that number we just wrote, so we get 8x cubed, which is what we should get because these are the same. If these are not the same, then you know you did something wrong. And 8x squared times negative 3, using the distribution property, we get negative 24x squared. Step 3, we're going to subtract, and we get 19x squared minus 45x minus 36, and that is the end of step, or that's the end of cycle 2. And we go on to cycle 3. Step number 1, x times what is equal to 19x squared? And the answer obviously is 19x. Step number 2, we multiply that number we just wrote by the divisor using the distribution property, 19x squared. And negative, that's kind of a big number, negative 3 times 19, what would that be? And it looks like we get negative 57x. And then we subtract, and we get 12x minus 36, and we move on to cycle 4. X times what number is equal to 12x? And the answer is 12, obviously. Step 2, we multiply 12 by the divisor, and we get 12x minus 36. And last step, we subtract, and we get 0. So there's no more numbers to subtract from up here. And our remainder is 0, so we're done. So now we just have to write the final answer, which is x cubed plus 8x squared plus 19x plus 12. And again, that answer comes from here. Okay, so if you got that answer, excellent, very good. Now, I want you to notice that the remainders, these yellow numbers, they were all 0. We had remainder 0 for every single problem that we've done so far. We had remainder 0 down here, remainder 0 on the problem we just did. But sometimes you don't get a remainder of 0, so you have to write your answer in a particular form. So let's do this problem. And we're going to find that the remainder is not 0, but there's another thing that we need to address here. You see how we have a degree 1 term, and then a degree 3 term, and a degree 2 term. They're not in descending order of powers, these terms here, in the dividend. Not only that, but the divisor is not in descending order of powers. We have degree 0 and then degree 1. Remember, if a number is just a constant, the degree is considered to be 0. And if you just have x with no exponent, it's degree 1. So first we need to rewrite this. We're going to write the divisor first, of course. Always write the divisor, but we're going to write the x first, then the negative 6. If you don't write both the dividend and the divisor in descending order of powers, then our long division algorithm is not going to work. That's one of the most important things to understand today. Your long division is not going to work unless you write the dividend and the divisor in descending order of powers. Now, it is possible to do the math without reordering, but it's going to get kind of confusing. And using the methods that we've learned so far, again, it's just not going to work. So at this point, we're ready. We've rewritten the dividend in descending order of powers and the divisor in descending order of powers. Again, it's so crucial. You must do that. So now we're going to do the same process we did before. We're going to take the first term in the divisor and ask, what do you multiply that term by to get negative 2x to the third power? And the answer is negative 2x squared. That's the first step of cycle 1. Second step, multiply that term by the divisor, and we get negative 2x cubed, which we should because we want the same number or same terms here. And negative 2x squared times negative 6 is positive 12x squared. Remember, when you multiply this term by the divisor, you have to use the distributive property. So now we're going on to step number 3. That was step 2 when we multiplied. Now step number 3 is to subtract. So we're going to draw the horizontal line. And these cancel out. And 3x squared minus 12x squared is negative 9x squared. And 4x minus nothing is 4x. And 20 minus nothing is 20. We're now done with cycle number 1. Now we move on to cycle number 2, step 1. Again, look at the first term and the divisor and ask, what do you multiply that term by to get negative 9x squared? It's always the same 3 steps in every cycle. The same 3 steps over and over and over again. So what do you multiply x by to get negative 9x squared? And the answer is negative 9x. Then step number 2 is to multiply. We get negative 9x squared. And negative 9x times negative 6 is positive 54x. And then we're going to subtract. This is step number 3. And we get negative 50x plus 20. And now we're on to cycle number 3. Step 1, x times what number is equal to negative 50x? And the answer is negative 50. Step number 2, negative 50 times x minus 6 is negative 50x plus 300. Step number 3, subtract. Again, same 3 steps over and over and over again. And we get negative 280. Now, there's no more numbers to subtract from, but the real indication that we're done is that the degree of the remainder is lower than the degree of the divisor. Now, again, how do you know what the degree of negative 280 is? Because you don't have an exponent, you don't have a variable. Well, remember, you can write negative 280 as negative 280 x to the 0 power, because x to the 0 power is just 1. So that equals negative 280. So we consider a constant term to be a 0 power term. So this is a 0 power term down here, but this term up here, if you look at the exponent, there is no exponent, but remember, when there's no exponent, it's considered to be 1 on the variable. So we know that the yellow remainder has a lower degree than the blue divisor, so that means that we're done. That proves that we're done. So now we write that number, or that expression up there, negative 2x squared minus 9x minus 50. So we have the quotient that we write here as usual, but we have a remainder. So what do we do with the remainder? Well, in my arithmetic course, we would just write r and then write the remainder here. But it's going to be more useful in this course to actually know how to write the overall expression in the math language. So what you do is you always add the remainder over x minus 6. So that's the actual answer. So you take your remainder and put it there, the yellow, and take your divisor and put it, take your divisor and put it in the denominator of that fraction. Sorry, my computer's going a little slow. So this box here, that's the answer. And that's what you always do. You always take the remainder and write it in the numerator here, and the divisor you write down here. But in textbooks, you're not going to see the answer written in this way. Most likely, you're going to see the answer written like so. Negative 2x squared minus 9x minus 50 minus positive 280 over x minus 6. So what they do is they take this negative symbol up here in the numerator and they throw it in front like so. Now that only works when you have one term in the numerator. If you have two terms in the numerator, then you have to change the sign of both terms. But just be aware, and I'm going to rectangle this as the final answer because that's what you're actually going to see. Just be aware that you're going to see the answer written in this form, not this form, because this bottom form here only uses one sign. It's a lot easier to write. So let's do another one of these problems before you try one on your own. This is a problem where, again, these terms are not in the proper order. We have to write the terms in descending order of powers. So we'll write the divisor at the far left as usual, but when we write the dividend, we need to write the highest power first, then the next highest power, then the next highest power, and the next highest power, so on and so forth. The algorithm does not work unless we do it that way. Okay, so let's start cycle 1. X times what is equal to x cubed? And the answer is x squared. Step number 2. X squared times x plus 1 is x cubed plus x squared. And step number 3, we're going to subtract. And when we subtract, you can see all these terms, they just go away. They just disappear. So we're just going to bring down these. X minus nothing is x, and negative 2 minus nothing is negative 2. So now we're on to cycle number 2. X times what is equal to x? And the answer is, obviously, 1. 1 times x is equal to x. So that's step number 2. We're now multiplying. 1 times x plus 1 is x plus 1. And step number 3, we're going to subtract. And x minus x is nothing. That's the way it should be. Negative 2 minus 1 is negative 3. So in that problem, we only went through 2 cycles. It was only necessary to go through 2 cycles. And it's always good to go back and check, make sure we did everything correctly. Looks like everything is right. So now we're going to write the final answer. The final answer is going to be x squared plus 1. That comes from here. And then we add the remainder divided by the divisor, because there is a remainder. And again, the reason we're stopping here is because there's no more numbers to subtract from, and this degree is lower than this degree here. But again, you're not going to see the answer written like that. You're going to see the answer written like this. So just be aware of that. Okay, now it's time for you to try one of those problems. Go ahead and try number 9, but you need to be aware that neither the dividend nor the divisor are written properly for our long division algorithm. You need to write the dividend so that it's in descending order of powers, and you need to write the divisor so it's in descending order of powers when you set up this problem. So when you set up the long division algorithm, be sure that those terms in the divisor and the dividend are in the proper order. Go ahead and try number 9, and when you come back, we'll do it together. Okay, we're back. So we're going to write the divisor first, as usual, but we're going to write the x first, then the 4. If we don't do it that way, we're probably going to have a lot of issues. Now we're going to write the term with the biggest exponent first, and then next smallest, and 300 is going to be last because that's just a constant. Now let's go back over this, make sure we wrote everything correctly. We don't want to do the problem and then find out we didn't write it correctly. Everything looks good. Now step number 1, the first term in the divisor times what is equal to 3x cubed, the first term in the dividend, and the answer is 3x squared. That's step number 1. Step number 2, multiply that term by the divisor, and we get 3x to the third power, and we get 12x squared. And then we're going to subtract, and we get negative 16x squared. And negative x minus nothing is negative x, and 300 minus nothing is 300. That was step number 3, subtract. Now we go to cycle number 2, step 1. The first term in the divisor times what is equal to the first term in the remainder? And the answer is negative 16x. Step number 2, multiply that term by the divisor, and we get negative 16x squared minus 64x. That was step number 2. And step number 3, we're going to subtract, and we get 63x plus 300. That was step number 3, and now we're on to cycle number 3. Step number 1, the first term in the divisor times what is equal to the first term in the remainder? And the answer is 63. Step number 2, multiply that number by the divisor, and we get 63x times 252, or equal to 63 times 4 is 252. Then we subtract, and we get 48. And we know that we're done at that point because the remainder has a degree of 0 and the divisor has a degree of 1. So the remainder has a degree that's lower than the degree of the divisor. So now we're going to write our final answer, which is this quotient up here plus the remainder over the divisor. That's always the way we write the final answer. So 3x squared minus 16x plus 63 plus 48. And it's going to be plus 48 because it's a positive 48 over x plus 4. So if you got that answer, very good. Good job. So the remainder, that went there, and the divisor went there. That's the way it always works. The remainder is always going to be in the numerator, and the divisor is always going to be in the denominator. So go ahead and try number 10. Remember to order these properly before you do the algorithm. When you come back, we'll do it together. Okay, we're back. We're going to write the divisor at the far left as usual, and the dividend. Now, negative 5x cubed is the highest power, so I'm going to write that first. If I don't write that first, the problem's not going to work. Then 2x squared, then negative 4x, then positive 10. And we need to go back and double check everything, make sure we wrote everything properly. Everything looks right. So in the first cycle, we're going to say x times what is equal to negative 5x cubed, and the answer is negative 5x squared. That's step number 1. Step number 2, multiply these two expressions, and we get negative 5x cubed plus 10x squared. Step number 3 is subtract, and we get negative 8x squared minus 4x plus 10. On to cycle number 2. Step number 1, x times what is equal to negative 8x squared, and the answer is negative 8x. Step number 2, negative 8x times x minus 2 is equal to negative 8x squared plus 16x. Step number 3, subtract negative 4 minus 16x. Negative 4x minus 16x is negative 20x. And 10 minus nothing is 10. So that is cycle number 2. Now on to cycle number 3. X times what is equal to negative 20x? And the answer obviously is negative 20. Step number 2, negative 20 times the divisor is negative 20x plus 40. Negative 20x plus 40. And when we subtract, we can see that the remainder is negative 30. And I'm going to move this up a little bit. So our remainder is negative 30, so we're going to write the expression up here first. So we had negative 5x squared minus 8x minus 20, and then minus, because the remainder is negative, minus 30 over x minus 2. And again, that 30 came from there, and the x minus 2 came from the divisor. That's the way it always works. Okay, so if you got that one right, excellent. Good job. So now we're going to do some different variations of problems. Let's divide and see what happens here. In these problems, different things can happen. They kind of change things a bit. So cycle number 1, x squared times what is equal to x to the 4th, and we get x squared. X squared times x squared minus 4 is x to the 4th minus 4x squared. And this is where we have the problem. We can subtract these terms here, we get 0, but we cannot subtract these terms. Why is that? Well, because we're dealing with apples, maybe I should use a different color there. We're dealing with apples and oranges. They're different. You have an x cubed term and you have an x squared term. So you can't subtract those. So one way you can do it is you can say, well, wait a second, I can't subtract those, but I can subtract these. So what you could do is just subtract these in your head and just bring down this 7x cubed, but probably the best way to do it is just to move this over and then subtract as you normally would. There's a lot of different ways to do it. So now we subtract, we get 0 there, and 7x cubed minus nothing is 7x cubed. 8x squared minus negative 4x squared, be careful, that's a double negative, so that's going to be 12x squared. And then we're subtracting nothing from those terms, so that's what we get. So you see what happened there? That was unusual. We're not used to seeing that. So sometimes you have to be careful when you're doing these problems. In fact, you have to be careful every problem you do in this class. So now we're going on to step 1 of cycle 2. X squared times what is equal to 7x cubed? And the answer is 7x. Step 2, 7x times x squared minus 4 is 7x cubed minus 28x. Step 3, subtract, but again, we've got a problem here. You can subtract these because it's apples and apples, but you can't subtract these because it's apples and oranges. So what we have to do, one way to do it, one way to deal with this problem is to move the negative 28x over. Now, again, you don't have to do it that way. All you have to understand is that you're subtracting these terms from these terms, and as long as you combine like terms and like terms only, and write the highest degree, then the next highest and next highest, then you can do it any way you want. But this is probably the easiest way to think about it at this point in your education. So now we subtract these, we get 0. We subtract 0 from 12x squared, and we get 12x squared. Subtract negative 28x from negative 10x, and we get positive 18x. Be careful, that's a double negative. Remember, that's a double negative. That becomes negative 10x plus 28. And negative 1 minus nothing is negative 1. So now we move on to cycle 3. Step 1, x squared times what is equal to 12x squared? And the answer is 12x, or just 12 actually. Step number 2, 12 times x squared minus 4 is 12x squared. And 12 times negative 4 is negative 48. Then we're going to move on to step 3, and we're going to subtract. But again, we have this problem, this nagging problem here. We can't subtract these. So we have to take that 48 and move it over, because we can subtract these. That's okay. So we subtract, and these obviously become 0. 18x minus nothing is 18x. Negative 1 minus negative 48 is positive 47. And then we move on to, well, actually we're done. Here's another feature of this problem that's different. The degree of this remainder is 1. Again, if there's no exponent on the variable, that means it's considered to be 1. So the degree is 1 on the remainder, but the degree of the divisor is 2. So the degree of the remainder down here is actually less than the degree of the divisor. So what does that mean? Well, it means we're done. There's no more numbers to subtract from. So we write this expression up here, x squared plus 7x plus 12, and then we add the remainder, 18x plus 47. I got that from down here, over, it's always going to be a fraction, over the divisor. I got that number from over here. Let me write that a little better. I got that number from here. So at that point, we're done. And let's move it over a little bit so we can rectangle our answer. Okay, let's try another one of these before you try one on your own. Now, in this problem, very important to notice that the divisor just happens to be ordered incorrectly, or it's not really ordered incorrectly, it's just not in descending order of powers. So when we rewrite the divisor, we're going to have to write that in descending order of power. So x cubed comes first, then negative 4x, then 4. And the dividend is actually in descending order of power, so we can just write that in the same order. But please be aware that you have to write in the proper order, or else things are going to get a little confusing. Okay, so the first term in the divisor times what is equal to the first term in the dividend? And the answer is negative 4. That's step number 1. Step number 2, multiply that term or that number by the divisor, and we get negative 4x cubed plus 16x minus 16. But again, with these problems, we have a situation here because we cannot subtract 16x from x squared. We can do it, but that we can't really combine the terms. So what we have to do is we have to shift the 16x and the negative 16 over, so we have kind of a gap there. And now these terms are lined up. So third step is to subtract. X squared minus nothing is x squared. 5x minus 16x is negative 11x. And 2 minus negative 16, that's a double negative. Be careful, that's a double negative. 2 minus negative 16 is the same thing as 2 plus 16. And at this point, we're actually done. I know that seems very weird, but the degree of the yellow remainder is 2. And the degree of the blue divisor is 3. So the degree down here is smaller than the degree up here, which means that we're done. We don't have to keep going. So the final answer is negative 4 plus the remainder divided by the divisor. That's the way it always works in every problem. But notice in this problem, we only had one cycle that we had to do in the long division algorithm. Sometimes that happens. So now it's time for you to try. Go ahead and attempt number 13. And when you come back, we'll do it together. Okay, we're back. So as usual, I'm going to write the divisor at the far left first, and then I'm going to write the dividend. And notice that the order of our numbers in the dividend, the order of our terms, that is correct. So we don't have to worry about that. Neither do we have to worry about that in the previous two problems. So let's go back and check, make sure we wrote everything correctly. Cycle number 1, x squared times what is equal to 6x to the 4th power? And the answer is 6x squared. Step 2, multiply 6x squared times the divisor, and we get 6x to the 4th plus 30x squared. But again, we have a problem. The problem is we can't just subtract the terms that are lined up as they are, because these terms, these green terms here, are not like terms. We cannot subtract an apple from an orange. So what we have to do is move that 30x squared below. Again, this is just one way to do it, but now we're going to subtract, and we get negative x cubed minus 28x squared plus 4x plus 100. And on to cycle number 2. x squared times what is equal to negative x cubed? And the answer is negative x. Negative x times x squared plus 5 is negative x cubed minus 5x. But again, we have a situation here. We cannot subtract those. So you know what we have to do? We have to take that term and move it over so we don't accidentally combine unlike terms. Now we subtract. 4x minus negative 5x is 9x. 100 minus nothing is 100. Then we move on to cycle number 3. So x squared times what is equal to negative 28x squared? And the answer is negative 28. Negative 28 times x squared plus 5 is negative 28x squared. And negative 140. Now we're going to subtract, but again, we cannot subtract the blue terms. They're not like terms. One has an x and the other one doesn't have an x. So I'm going to have to move this term over because I can subtract negative 140 from 100. So we subtract and we get 240. And at this point, it's very important to understand that we have no more terms over here to subtract from, and the degree of the remainder is less than the degree of the divisor, which means that we're done. So our final answer is 6x squared minus x minus 28 plus 9x plus 240 over x squared plus 5. And I'll move that over and we can rectangle that. So if you got that answer, excellent. So go ahead and try number 14. You can use number 11 and number 12 and 13 to help you. When you come back, we'll do it together. Okay, we're back. So as usual, we're going to write the divisor first, and then the dividend. And go back over those numbers, make sure we wrote them correctly. Then we're going to start cycle number 1. X to the 4th times what is equal to 5x to the 4th? And the answer is 5. Step number 2, 5 times the divisor is 5x to the 4th plus 10x squared plus 35. But now we have multiple problems. We can't subtract these, and we can't subtract these. They're just not like terms. So we have to move these terms over. I have to move that term over also. And now we're ready to subtract. So we get 2x cubed and negative 11x squared and 10x. And 9 minus 35 is negative 26. And very important to understand that the degree in the remainder is smaller than the degree in the divisor, which means that we're done. So the answer is 5 plus the remainder divided by the divisor. It's always going to be the remainder divided by the divisor. So let me make some more room here. So there we go. So if you got that answer, excellent. So now we're just going to do some more variations of these problems. Let's attempt this problem. Again, you write the divisor first, then the dividend. But notice that we have kind of a weird situation here that we have not encountered yet. Notice that we have degree 4 here, And the degree of this term over here is 2, so we skipped a degree. We went from 4 to 2. We haven't done that yet in any of the problems that we've done today. So what you're going to find is something weird is going to happen. Let's see what happens here. X times what is equal to negative x to the fourth? And the answer is negative x cubed. Multiply these, negative x to the fourth minus 2x cubed. And as you can see, we have a problem here. These are not lined up. So we have the same type of problem that we had in the previous examples. So, but in this situation, instead of moving the bottom numbers, these numbers down here, we're going to move the top numbers, because this number, or this expression, that's a third power expression, so it needs to go next to the fourth power expression. So we're going to move the top numbers, and then we're going to subtract nothing minus negative 2x cubed. What would that be? Nothing minus negative 2x cubed, that would be 2x cubed, because you're subtracting a negative from 0. That's the situation. And that double negative becomes a positive, so we have positive 2x cubed, which we put here. So again, the numbers have to line up. You can't subtract an x cubed term from a 3x squared term. Now, a lot of students get kind of confused when they see these huge gaps here. So what they like to do is they like to write a 0 term, which you could call a 0 term, plus 0x cubed, and that kind of helps them understand. They actually like doing that at the beginning of the problem. You don't have to do that, but that's just one way to do it. And you can write a 0x term over here. So now we subtract, and we get 3x squared and 2, but we're not really subtracting anything from that term, so we don't need that. And so there you go. So now we're going on to cycle number 2. X times what number is equal to 2x cubed? And the answer is 2x squared. Multiply these two, and you get 2x to the third power plus 4x squared. Subtract, and we get negative x squared plus 2. On to the next cycle. X times what is equal to negative x squared? And the answer obviously is negative x. Negative x times x plus 2 is negative x squared minus 2x. And we have a situation here because notice we have to move this top term over because we can't subtract negative 2x from 2. We can't combine those terms. So we just consider this to be a 0x. You don't have to write that 0x term if you don't want to. It just kind of helps us see. But we subtract and we get positive 2x, and 2 minus nothing is 2. So now we move on to cycle number 4. X times what is equal to 2x? And the answer is obviously 2. 2 times x plus 2 is 2x plus 4. And you can see we have a remainder of negative 2. And so we're ready to write our answer. Again, you have to combine like terms here, and that can be tricky when our numbers are not lined up. That's the whole moral of the story here. So our final answer is negative x cubed plus 2x squared minus x plus 2 minus, our remainder is negative, so we're going to write minus 2 over x plus 2. So you really have to be careful. Again, you don't have to write this yellow term here if you don't want to. You can just leave that blank, and that'll be fine. So let's try one more of these before you try one on your own. Let's write the divisor first, as usual, and the dividend. And we're going to ask x squared times what is equal to x to the fifth. And the answer is x cubed. Then x cubed times x squared minus 1 is x to the fifth minus x cubed. And next step is to subtract. But notice we can't subtract these, they're not like terms. We have to take the top terms and we have to move them over. So now we can subtract, and I'm not going to write 0x cubed here. You don't really have to do that. Sorry, my pen is not working too good right now. Subtract these and you get positive x squared. Again, if you subtract a negative number, that's adding that number. And subtract these and we get the following. On to cycle number 2. So x squared times what is equal to x cubed? And the answer is obviously x. X times x squared minus 1 is x cubed minus x. And then we're going to subtract. And these you can subtract, so that's perfectly fine. X minus negative x is 2x. Again, be very careful about subtracting a negative number. That means you're adding the number. And now notice that we don't have any more numbers to subtract from, and the degree of our remainder is smaller than the degree of the divisor. So that means we're done. So our final answer is x cubed plus x, and we got that number over here, or that expression, plus 2x minus 1 over x squared minus 1. That's where we got those numbers, and there you go. So just be aware that you have to be careful in this green region here that you're combining like terms. And if you're not combining like terms, then just make a slight modification, move the numbers over a little bit, and you'll be fine. So now try number 17, and when you come back, we'll do it together. All right, we're back. I'm going to move through these pretty quickly because we're kind of running out of time here. So step 1, we ask negative x squared times what is equal to 3x to the fourth, and the answer is negative 3x squared. Step 2, multiply, and we get positive 3x to the fourth and negative 15x cubed. Step 3, we're going to subtract, and we get 13x cubed plus 4. Then we go on to cycle 2. Negative x squared times what is equal to 13x cubed? And the answer is negative 13x. Step 2, negative 13x times the divisor. Negative 13x times negative x squared is positive 13x cubed. We know we did it correctly because these numbers are the same. But remember, you have to use the distribution property when you're multiplying, so we have to multiply negative 13x by 5x, and we get negative 65x squared. Now here's where we have the alignment issues. So one way to do it is to move this 4 over. You can just do it in your head, but I'm going to move the 4 over, and now we can subtract the third step. So these cancel out as usual, and 0 minus negative 65x squared is positive 65x squared, because that's a double negative, and 4 minus nothing is 4. So we're almost done, but the degree of the remainder is equal to the degree of the divisor. So we have one more step. Step number 1 of cycle 3, negative x squared times what is equal to 65x squared? And the answer is negative 65. Step 2 of cycle 3, negative 65 times the divisor, and we get positive 65x squared. That's kind of a big number. That's going to be negative 325x. Step 3 of cycle 3 is to subtract, but again, we have alignment issues. We have to take this 4 and move it over like that. So we may want to extend this line out a little bit, and maybe this red line a little bit. That's perfectly fine. You can do that. Now we have 0 minus negative 325x, and we get positive 325x. And 4 minus nothing is 4. And so now the degree of the remainder is less than the degree of the divisor, which means that we're done. So now we write this expression up here as the answer, but we have to consider that we have a remainder. So negative 3x squared minus 13x minus 65 plus the remainder, 325x plus 4 over the divisor, which is negative x squared plus 5x. Sorry, my pen is kind of doing some weird stuff. Let me write that negative more legibly. And that is the final answer. We got this denominator. Whoops, that denominator came from the divisor, and the numerator came from the remainder. So if you got that answer, good job. So go ahead and try number 18. When you come back, we'll do it together. Okay, we're back. So we're going to write the divisor and the dividend. But notice that there are gaps when it comes to the degree of each term. We go degree 6, degree 2, degree 0. So that means we're going to have to worry about alignment, probably. So x cubed times what is equal to 2x to the 6th? And the answer is 2x cubed. Multiply the divisor and that number, and we get 2x to the 6th minus 6x cubed. Subtract. But again, we have an issue here. Now, you should probably be aware that you don't really have to move these numbers over. I mean, that's what we've been doing, but you don't really have to. You just have to recognize that there's no x cubed term up here. So when you subtract negative 6x cubed, you're just subtracting from 0. So 0 minus negative 6x cubed is positive 6x cubed. And in these terms, there's nothing to subtract from, so you just rewrite them down here. If you want to, you can do it that way. But if it confuses you not to line those up, then you want to move these numbers over like so. It just depends on how you want to do it. So now we're moving to cycle number 2. X cubed times what is equal to 6x cubed? And the answer is 6, just 6. 6 times x cubed is 6x cubed. 6 times negative 3 is negative 18. And again, when we subtract, we have alignment issues. In this case, the negative 18, the bottom number has to be moved over. So now when we subtract, we get 2x squared, and 1 minus negative 18 is positive 19. And notice that the degree in the remainder is less than the degree in the divisor, and there's no more terms that we can subtract from. So our final answer is 2x cubed plus 6, where we got that from here, plus 2x squared plus 19 all over x cubed minus 3. So if you got that answer, excellent. Very good. So that was the class today. If you'd like to take screenshots of all the work that we did to help you with your homework or to study for tests, go ahead and do that now. Here's screenshot number 1. And number 2. Number 3. And number 4. And number 5. And don't go before you get your homework. Let's take a look at the homework. Here's screenshot number 1 of the homework. But don't go before you get the answers. Remember, it's not enough just to attempt the homework. You need to do it correctly. So here's the answers. Make sure you check all your answers. And if you get something wrong, remember, you got to go back and correct it. So get that homework done, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next class.